morning, and we'll do something a little different in that I would like to hear from the family member what it was like for us to provide care for her loved one. The patient was 80s, had pretty significant osteoporosis, had severe mitral regurg with aortic stenosis, congestive heart failure, hypoalbuminemia, had a history of hypertension with strokes. She had had recurrent bladder infection along with pneumonia, aspiration pneumonia. The hospice was asked to get involved on her last hospitalization when she had been admitted with pneumonia, and in the ICU, while rolling her from side to side, actually fractured both of her humerus. She was maintained via peg tube feeding, and I have to honestly say, had it not been for the caregiver, had it not been for her daughter, Mrs. B would not have lived the full life that she lived. And that's all I want to say about the case, and I'm going to turn this over to Yvonne. Come on. Put it behind you. Here. On the other side. Down by your mouth. And you can show the as repeated.
Okay.
Introduce you.
Okay. Good morning. I thank Dr. Melvin for inviting me here today. My mother and I were always very, very close. I was very close to both my parents. I grew up in awe of my parents. My mother declared at 4 years old that she was going to be a nurse. I'm not even sure if she had ever seen a nurse at this point in her life, but she knew they helped people, and that's what she wanted to do with her life. She went to elementary school locally, then she went to Knoxville, Tennessee, to where she could work her way through high school and pay for it herself. She later enrolled in a Florida sanitarium where she could go to nursing school there. It was a private school. They had very strict rules, one of which is she couldn't get married until after graduation. This shouldn't have been a problem because my dad was serving his country on a ship, and my mother was living in the dorm. My dad got shore leave in December of '53, and he went and picked Mother up, and they started driving home from Florida. Along the way, they got to cutting up and carrying on, and they dared one another to get married. So my dad pulled over the car in Forsyth, Georgia, and they went to find the courthouse. An elderly gentleman sitting there said, "Second room down the hall." It was obvious why they were there. They came home. Daddy dropped my mother off at her parents', and he went home to his parents. They told no one. But my mom always said, "Be sure your sins will find you out," and they did. In her junior year, she was kicked out. She transferred to Erlanger School of Nursing, where she graduated in 1954 with her RN. Mother wanted to experience everything nursing had to offer. She worked in the ER, she worked in the OR, she worked with pediatrics, geriatrics, you name it. When she took a job as a head nurse on 300, it took its toll in a quick hurry. This was the floor that they sent people writing their last chapters of their life with their battle of cancer. It was before the days of hospice. And it was not unusual for my mother to lose a couple of patients every shift. This hit her hard every time. She would come home crying. Sometimes she'd come home bawling. She felt every loss because she relived losing her own father to cancer in this way. After she'd been there for quite a while. My dad continued to beg her to leave. Finally, she was frustrated with him continuing to ask this, and she just told him, she says, Tom Blevins, the day I quit caring about my patients, the day it doesn't bother me when I lose one, is the day I stopped nursing. My mother was a nurse. When I was standing in front of my mother's coffin, a lady came up to me that I had not seen before. She introduced herself to me and told me that she worked with my mother at Erlanger for years. She told me that she was sorry that my mother was an Alzheimer's victim. That blew me away. That was hard for me to handle. I never visualized my mother at all, that she was a victim of anything. When I regained my thought pattern, I thanked the lady for coming. I thanked her for her friendship with my mother. But I informed her that my mother was no victim. She loved and lived life to the fullest, Alzheimer's and all. She took everything that came her way and made the best of it. My mother was a teacher and a nurse. My mother taught me more in the 14 years that I cared for her than she and Daddy ever got through my thick skull as a kid. Alzheimer's brought many, many gifts to our family, the most of which mothers helped me to realize the small gifts as well as the big gifts. It slowed my pace, and I could never visualize that as the results of a victimhood. Early on when we came to hospice, I knew that the hospice philosophy overall was not what I wanted. And I told Dr. Melvin this in the hospital. They were trying to get rid of us because we had 2 broken arms. And so they called Dr. Melvin in. She assessed my mother and explained to me how really sick she was. I knew this. She wanted to make sure that I really did want Mother to stay on full code status, and I did. Dr. Melvin made a lot of exceptions to take our case, and I greatly appreciate her for that. She promised me that she would give my mother proactive care in everything. She did that. She kept my mother on full code status. She helped us like nobody else could or would at that time. The one thing that I did not take the time to explain to hospice team why my insistence for proactive care in everything, whether it was a small problem or a big problem, is I had seen miracles. The morning of October 22, 2002, my mother woke up about 5 o'clock a.m. This was not unusual for her. A lot of times she'd wake up this time in the morning and she'd want a drink of water or a drink of juice or a snack, and then she'd go back to sleep till breakfast. This morning changed my life forever. It changed Mother's life forever. Shortly after we had talked and visited for a few minutes, there was a blood-curdling scream come from within my mother. I knew immediately that we were in big trouble. I had seen Mother have TIAs before and small strokes, but this was very evident that we were in big trouble. I screamed for Tom to come and call 911 when I worked for my mother. Usually it takes about 25 to 30 minutes for an ambulance to respond to us. That morning, thank God, it only took about half that time. The EMTs rushed in and immediately started frantically trying to help my mother. They started an IV, which is a hard stick, always has been with Mother. They tried to ventilate her in our home, and they couldn't, so they just bagged her to keep oxygen going in. When they got us ready to transport, they alerted the ER that we were coming and the situation we were in. When we got into the emergency room, there was a frenzy of people working around my mother, frantically trying to save her life, until they realized she was an Alzheimer's patient. They walked away. I was begging them to please help my mother. It's no use. A few minutes earlier, they were willing to do anything to save her life. But when they realized she had Alzheimer's,